For years, the Mann family stood tall in the world of gospel, a shining symbol of love, unity, and unwavering faith. To millions, they weren't just artists, they were role models. David Mann was seen as the joyful, ever-supportive husband. Tamela Mann, the powerhouse voice behind gospel anthems like "Take Me to the King," was adored as a spiritual mother to the masses. Together, they created a brand rooted in ministry, music, and what many thought was unconditional love. But behind the polished image was a truth that no one saw coming. While fans believed in a fairy tale, Tiffany Mann, David and Tamela's daughter, was watching a nightmare unfold. As her mother lay unconscious on life support, Tiffany stepped forward not to sing, but to speak. And what she revealed shattered the foundation of gospel royalty. Behind the gospel image, the reality no one saw. For decades, David and Tamela Mann were the embodiment of Black excellence in gospel and entertainment. Their love story, their music, their ministry, all of it felt genuine. Churches welcomed them. Fans followed them. Even their marriage became a model for couples in the faith. But that perfect image is now cracking. Tiffany Mann's revelation didn't come with camera crews or PR handlers. It came from a daughter pushed to the edge. She shared that while her mother's health was deteriorating rapidly, her father, the man known for laughter and loyalty, was more concerned with schedules and sponsorships. According to Tiffany, when Tamela collapsed, David didn't rush into the ambulance. He called his manager instead. There were contracts to manage, appearances to protect. "We couldn't lose momentum," she recalled him saying. That line alone sparked outrage across social media. The image of a loving husband suddenly turned into a man more committed to the brand than to the woman he built it with. Tiffany's claim: David not only ignored the warning signs of Tamela's failing health, but deliberately kept it hidden from those closest to her. A daughter's pain. "My mama is dying," and he knew. The silence surrounding Tamela's absence was deafening. Fans noticed she hadn't been active on social media. Scheduled performances were canceled with vague excuses. But no one expected the truth to hit as hard as it did when Tiffany finally spoke out. In an emotional live stream, Tiffany, her eyes swollen from crying, looked into the camera and delivered 7 words that left the gospel community stunned. "My mama is dying," and he knew. This wasn't a woman seeking attention. Her voice cracked with grief. Her hands trembled as she held up a crumpled doctor's report, dated just days earlier. It detailed Tamela's worsening liver condition, her critical need for constant care, and the threat of organ failure. Tiffany alleged that David read that report. He understood the danger. Yet instead of canceling tour dates or informing family, he told doctors to keep it quiet. "We don't want this messing with the brand," he allegedly said. No prayer circles were called, no church support, no family meetings, just silence. Tiffany's heartache was clear. While Tamela lay dying, David was guarding a carefully curated image. An image now unraveling in front of the world. The voice note that shook the internet. Just when people thought the situation couldn't get more heartbreaking, Tiffany dropped something that shattered every remaining illusion. A voice message from Tamela herself. Weak, breathless, sobbing. "I'm tired, baby," Tamela whispered in the audio. "Daddy don't listen no more." They all keep saying smile for the fans, but it hurts. It hurts to pretend. The moment Tiffany played that recording, everything changed. This wasn't just a family disagreement or a daughter venting. It was proof of pain, of suffering, of a woman, beloved and admired, reaching out from her own breaking point. Tiffany explained that she held onto that message for weeks, unsure whether to make it public. But seeing her mother unconscious, clinging to life, surrounded by machines in a hospital room, she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. "This isn't about clout," Tiffany said through tears. "This is about my mom's life." The internet responded in a tidal wave. Fans who once praised David Mann's wholesome image now questioned everything. The voice note stripped away all doubt. It was no longer a one-sided story. It was the haunting cry of a woman exhausted by performance, pushed to her limit, and forgotten by the man she once trusted most. When silence becomes strategy. The days following Tiffany's reveal were filled with more questions than answers, especially because David Mann said almost nothing. No statement, no apology, not even a defense. Just a vague Instagram story, black background, white text. Every family has battles, but only God knows the truth. To fans, it felt like a slap in the face. Tiffany later revealed she had already confronted her father in private. His reaction wasn't sorrow, it was strategy. "He told me to hush," she said. "Told me Mama wouldn't want this mess out in the streets." But Tiffany knew better. Tamela didn't want a cover-up. She wanted love. She wanted her family beside her, not her husband chasing contracts while she slipped away. Soon, alleged text messages began leaking from former staff and insiders. One showed David texting a promoter 2 days after Tamela was admitted to the ICU. "Let's keep this quiet. Tam's just a little tired. We're still good for next week if she gets her voice back." The silence wasn't just carelessness. It was calculated. To Tiffany, that's the deepest betrayal of all. While Tamela was dying, David was treating it like a minor PR problem. The brand, once built on love and faith, had become a shield for secrecy, and the truth was buried beneath it. The gospel world responds. Once Tiffany's interview and Tamela's voice note hit the internet, the gospel community erupted. Supporters, critics, old friends, former collaborators, everyone had something to say. Churches that once welcomed the Mann family with open arms now held urgent prayer services. Not just for Tamela, but for clarity. Entire congregations cried out in worship, lighting candles, playing Tamela's music, and praying for a miracle. Social media turned into a battleground. Some still clung to hope that David was misunderstood. Others were furious, calling for accountability from gospel leaders who had allowed fame to cloud compassion. A prominent pastor tweeted, "We've turned our women into ministry machines," and called it faith. But who's protecting their hearts? It became more than a family scandal. It sparked a movement. People began questioning how many women, especially black women in ministry, had been quietly suffering behind the scenes. How many had given their all, only to be treated like tools instead of treasures? How many times had God's work been used to justify emotional neglect? Tiffany's voice became a megaphone for all those stories, and Tamela, the woman who gave the world healing through song, became the face of that silent suffering. That wasn't love, that was pressure. As support for Tiffany surged online, more revelations emerged, and they were even more disturbing. Tiffany shared that this wasn't the first time Tamela had shown signs of exhaustion. In fact, her health had been in decline for over a year. There were nights she couldn't climb the stairs without struggling to breathe. She'd complained of migraines, dizziness, and recurring blackouts. Still, the schedule didn't stop. "Baby, we've got appearances next week," David would allegedly tell her. "No breaks, no time to rest, no healing, just work." According to Tiffany, her mother even begged to take a year off. She wanted to step away from the spotlight, focus on her health, and just live in peace. But David reportedly denied that request too, saying Tamela was the glue that held the ministry together. Without her voice, he claimed, the whole operation would collapse. Tiffany's voice trembled as she described watching her mother record a worship album while burning up with a 102-degree fever. Tamela could barely stand, but she kept pushing because she thought it was holy. She thought it was necessary. She didn't know it was killing her. And that's when Tiffany said the words that cut deeper than anything else. That wasn't love. That was pressure, worship, or exploitation. As the details continued to unfold, gospel fans everywhere were forced to confront a painful truth. When does ministry cross the line into manipulation? What Tiffany revealed wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Her story became a mirror for an entire industry that often glorifies struggle, romanticizes sacrifice, and labels burnout as being called by God. Churches started holding vigils, yes, but they also started having conversations. Real ones. Pastors invited guest speakers to address toxic church culture. Choirs performed Tamela's songs in her honor, but with a new level of sorrow in their voices. Because now they understood what may have been going on behind the music. Even gospel artists who had toured with the Manns began to step back. Some issued cryptic posts. Others publicly sided with Tiffany, admitting they had noticed Tamela's declining health months earlier, but were warned not to say a word. A former assistant even confirmed that David once said, "If she slows down now, we lose everything." The exploitation was no longer just a theory. It was playing out in front of the world. The gospel community, long admired for its faith and resilience, was now facing a reckoning, and the line between service and suffering had never been more clear. A daughter's fight to save her mother. While the world debated, Tiffany remained at her mother's side. In an Instagram Live that felt more like a prayer than a post, she sat on a cot outside Tamela's ICU room, softly singing the hymns her mother had once performed for millions. Nurses reported Tamela's hand twitched when Tiffany sang. Maybe it was a reflex, maybe something more. But for Tiffany, it was a sign of hope. She spoke directly to her mother, even when Tamela couldn't respond. "You don't have to be strong anymore, Mama," she whispered. "You don't have to carry us. Just come back." As Tiffany poured her heart out, the world watched, not just in sadness, but in admiration. She had every reason to stay silent, every reason to let her mother's legacy fade quietly. But instead, she did what many wouldn't dare. She told the truth. In doing so, she gave her mother a fighting chance, not just to live, but to be seen. Not as a product, not as a platform, but as a woman, a wife, a mother, and maybe, just maybe, as someone who deserved better. The silence that broke everything 3 days. That's how long David Mann was gone from the hospital after Tamela slipped into a coma. When he finally returned, his eyes were bloodshot, his lips trembled, but it wasn't enough for Tiffany. Not anymore. Standing beside her unconscious mother, she turned to face her father with years of hurt boiling to the surface. "This is not a show. This is your wife," she said, voice shaking but fierce. David tried to explain. "Tiffany, you don't understand." "No," she snapped. "You don't." She accused him of prioritizing press conferences over hospital visits, of posting smiling photos while Tamela was fighting for her life. "You turned her suffering into your strategy," she said. "And I stayed silent because I didn't want to shame this family. But that silence ends now." Then the monitors beeped. Tamela's fingers moved. Just once. Was it a reflex? A miracle? No one could say for sure. But for Tiffany, it was enough to keep fighting, not just for her mother's life, but for the truth. Outside that hospital room, the gospel world was already reeling. Fans discovered that while Tamela underwent emergency surgery, David was smiling in promo shots from a charity event. The awakening of a community. What started as a daughter's desperate plea has turned into a spiritual reckoning. Churches began dedicating entire sermons to the protection of gospel women. Artists who once stood beside David now publicly distanced themselves. Entire choirs sang Tamela's songs with fresh tears in their eyes, not just out of admiration, but out of guilt that they hadn't noticed the warning signs sooner. Statements from gospel networks followed. Fans organized virtual prayer circles. Some gospel leaders apologized for turning their backs on women like Tamela, women who gave everything to the ministry, yet were treated like vessels, not human beings. And yet, in the center of it all was Tiffany, a daughter, a truth teller, a woman who risked everything to speak when it mattered most. "I love my dad," she said during one live stream, her voice soft but steady. But love doesn't mean silence, and truth is not betrayal. The house that no longer feels like home. When Tiffany went live on Instagram, the world didn't expect what came next. She wasn't just talking, she was walking. Slowly, carefully, she moved through the home that once held laughter, love, and Sunday morning worship. The house Tamela built, the house gospel music filled, now echoed with silence. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a graveyard of memories. She pointed at the kitchen, once alive with the smell of cornbread and greens. "This is where Mama used to hum while cooking," she whispered. "Now, it just smells like medicine and bleach." Her footsteps echoed on the tile floor, each one carrying grief. The living room still held Tamela's favorite blanket on the couch, folded neatly as if waiting for her to return. The piano in the corner sat untouched. No music, no joy. "This used to be a place of healing," Tiffany said, voice cracking. "Now it just feels hollow." She stood in front of a framed photo of her parents smiling, dressed in white, surrounded by family. She stared at it for a long time before quietly saying, "This was the dream, wasn't it? But look at us now." Her live stream became more than a tour of a house. It was a glimpse into a family's collapse, a behind-the-curtain look at what happens when public image takes priority over private pain. She was the ministry, not the brand. One of the most powerful things Tiffany said was this: "My mother wasn't just part of the ministry, she was the ministry." And that statement landed like thunder. People used to say the Mann family built a gospel empire, but let's be honest, Tamela was the cornerstone. Her voice carried the worship, her presence anchored the stage, her name sold the tickets. Without her, there was no brand. So how did it get to this point? How did the very woman who carried the ministry— Tiffany's voice cracked when she said it— they turned her from a person into a product? The truth is brutal. In many ministries and music careers, the person doing the heavy lifting becomes invisible behind the brand. They're pushed, promoted, packaged, until there's nothing left. And that's what Tiffany was exposing. Tamela wasn't asking for fame. She was asking for rest, for health, for peace, and the people closest to her couldn't or wouldn't grant her that. "She gave you her gift," Tiffany said in one live, "and y'all gave her a schedule. She gave you worship. You gave her burnout." In the end, Tamela's body broke down, not because she wasn't strong, but because even the strongest woman has a limit. And when the brand became more important than the woman behind it, everything fell apart. The gospel industry's dirty secret. What began as a heartbreaking family story quickly exposed something much bigger, a truth that the gospel industry has kept hidden for far too long. Tiffany didn't just call out her father, she called out an entire system. Her mother's suffering became a symbol of a deeper problem. For decades, gospel women, singers, pastors' wives, prayer leaders have been praised for their strength, their faith, their tireless work. But behind the songs and sermons, many are suffering in silence. Tiffany revealed how Tamela was pushed past exhaustion, that even when she could barely walk or breathe, she was expected to show up, smile, and sing. Her health was spiraling, and the response wasn't concern, it was business. A former tour manager leaked a schedule showing back-to-back appearances for Tamela just days before her collapse. Another assistant claimed David had once said, "If she slows down now, the ministry loses its power." Mental health advocates started weighing in. Pastors who once booked the Manns began reflecting publicly. One tweet went viral. "We called it faith, but it was really exploitation." Tiffany's courage opened a floodgate. Other artists began sharing stories. Fans started questioning their own churches, and a new wave of accountability began rising. Because if the gospel message is truly about healing and freedom, then it must also be about protecting the people who preach it. And Tamela deserved that protection, not just as a singer, but as a soul. She moved, the flicker of a miracle. In the midst of all the chaos, the backlash, the silence, the grief, something sacred happened, a flicker of life. Tiffany had been sitting by her mother's hospital bed every single day. She talked to Tamela even when there was no response. She read psalms. She sang softly. She held her mother's hand like it was the last connection to hope. And then, one afternoon, as she hummed a verse from Take Me to the King, Tamela's fingers moved. Just once. But it was enough to stop time. The machines beeped. Nurses rushed in. Tiffany jumped up, tears spilling from her eyes. "She moved," she whispered. "She moved." The doctors were careful. "It might be a reflex," one said gently. "Or it might be something more." But Tiffany didn't need a diagnosis. She needed that moment. In a storm of pain and betrayal, that tiny movement became her anchor. It was the first sign that maybe Tamela was still fighting, even from somewhere deep inside. And for the millions watching this unfold, it was more than a medical update. It was a spiritual one. A sign that Tamela's story wasn't over. A sign that even when voices are silenced, they still echo in the hearts that loved them. Tiffany returned to her cot just outside the ICU. She sat quietly, hands trembling, and said, "I'm going to keep singing, Mama. I don't care if it takes days or weeks. I'll be right here." And that's exactly what she did. Hope isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a twitch, a breath, a whispered prayer. And in that quiet miracle, the entire gospel world and the internet held its breath with her. Because in a world full of performance, that moment was finally, purely real. It's the beginning of our accountability, the beginning of healing, the beginning of truth, finally being louder than the image. Now it's our turn to carry the song.